All right, guys, welcome to another podcast. So, as you can probably surmise from the title, what we're going to be talking about today is something, for want of a better name, that I will refer to as WOLHUTER'S Law. So, what is this podcast all about? Well, probably the biggest travesty of the South African school selection was the mission of Kade Wolhuter. I mean, he is far and away the best fly-off in high school rugby, and he's a talent that doesn't come about every day. Now, SARU'S said that they're not going to select any players who've signed overseas contracts straight from school, but we got to think to ourselves, is this not a bit short-sighted? And what we have to do is have to explore the direction that rugby's taking, and we're going to see that this is just the beginning. Now, what it is a result of the inevitable globalization of rugby and the need for a regional power base. Now, in my humble opinion, SARU need not fight the system, but what they need to do is put measures in place to protect the talent we're producing in order to stay competitive in what's going to become the world's new order. And the way to do this is to initiate a ruling, and I would refer to that ruling as WOLHUTER'S Law. So let's look at the Wolhuter situation. So basically what happened was Kade Wolhuter had been approached by a French club who were interested in signing him to their academy. Now, some reliable sources, and these are very reliable sources, confirmed to me that the player himself had actually informed SARU about this contract. Now, SARU informed Wolhuter that they couldn't offer any guarantees, and what happened then was the player put pen to paper. I mean, wouldn't you do the same? So, what would you have done in this situation? I mean, I'm very much certain that his parents wanted the best possible future for their child, and they encouraged it. And I mean, who can blame them for that? Now, what is Wolhuter's reward for his honesty? Non-selection to the South African schools team. And frankly, I think it's a travesty and yet another incident of SARU's lack of clear thinking that could cost the nation in the future. Now, we're going to have to talk about rugby protectionism, which I've talked about a lot. Now, rugby union has a long history of protectionism, and in my opinion, it's a reason why the greatest game on earth has never reached its global potential. I've alluded to it in previous podcasts that in order for the game to have a global reach, it needs a global power base. Now, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, we either lack funding, geography, popularity, or simply the numbers to fill that need. Europe is an inevitable power base for rugby's future, and what we can actually do is we can look to soccer's history as a sign of things to come. So we're going to look at 3 generations of greats. Now, before you Ronaldo lovers start getting on me, what I'm talking about is players that are outside the realm of influence, so to speak. So I'm looking at South American players here, not European players. So what we're going to do is take a look at some KPIs regarding these greats. So let's start with Pele. So he started his youth career in Baru from 1953 to 1956. He made his pro debut at the age of 16, debuted for Santos in Brazil, made his international debut at the age of 17, and if we look at his club history, he started off as Santos from 1956 to 1974, then he moved on to the New York Cosmos from 1975 to 1977, and he never moved to Europe. Then we look at Maradona. Well, he started his youth career at Argentinos Juniors from 1968 to 75. He made his pro debut at the age of 16. He made his club debut for that same youth club, Argentinos Juniors. He made an international debut at the same age, 17. If we take a look at his history, he started off at Argentinos Juniors, moved to Boca Juniors, then to Barcelona, Napoli, Sevilla, back to Argentina to Newell's Old Boys, and then finally to Boca Juniors. And he moved to Europe at the age of 22. Then we look at Messi. He started off at Newell's Old Boys from 94 to 2000, moved to Barcelona in 2001. Stayed in the youth system until 2004, and he made his debut at the age of 17 in 2005. He made his debut for Barcelona in Spain. His international debut was at 18, and he stayed at one club the entire time, which is Barcelona, from 2005 to the present. Moved to Europe at the age of 14. So what is my point based on this? Well, you can see that it was pretty normal for the first generation to just stay in their home country and play for home clubs. And then as soccer became globalized, Maradona started off at South American clubs and then gradually moved on to European clubs. Messi started off at a European club, basically, in terms of his pro debut. So what we see happening here is at a younger and younger age of generation moving over to Europe, and we can sort of see this happening a lot, especially with superstar players. in the age, sort of 18 to 21 age bracket. I mean, if you're a very, very talented Brazilian or Argentinian player that's 18 or 19 years old, a top European club is going to snap you up. That is just the reality. So let's take a look at the overseas-based Argentinian Brazil players. And I'm going to measure it by the World Cup. So from 1958 to 1986, the players were basically 95% from local clubs of all the World Cup squads. Then from 1990 to 2002, we saw that drop down to 39%. And then from 2006 to the present day, it's dropped all the way down to 14%. Now, nobody can prevent progress in the inevitable. This is always going to happen. As the game has to become more globalized, there's going to be a regional superpower, so to speak, and that's where players are inevitably going to be moving. But let's take it even a step further. So let's take a look at Brazil youth squads, and we're going to use Brazil under 17 to compare to South African schools. Brazil under 20 is obviously going to compare to the baby box, and the Brazilian national team will obviously compare to the Springboks. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the local international mix in each squad using similar generations. So the under 17 squad in 2009 had 100% locally based players. They're still in school. You expect this. So when that same group went up to under 20 level in 2011, it was 96% locally based players. And the 4% that were based overseas were absolutely world-class players. I mean, I'm talking about Neymar here. I'm talking about Philippe Coutinho. I'm talking about that level of players. So, the 1 out of 100. Those were the guys that are basically based overseas. And the majority of the guys are still being developed and nurtured locally. And then if you take a look at the World Cup squad in 2018, there's only 13% locally based players. So this is very common in soccer, especially for international teams that aren't based in the region of power, which is Europe. So you see this with Brazil, you see this with Argentina, and you see that with an extent to sort of Colombia, Ecuador, and those type of teams as well, where a lot of their players are actually based overseas by the time they are fully fledged internationals, and it's just a natural progression. Now, what is South Africa going to look like in the future? My guess is that you're going to start seeing similar numbers crop up for South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. I really do believe that if we do intend to be globally competitive. Now, why are they looking at South African players? The French clubs. Why are they looking at our boys? Well, the first reason is obviously the talent. And I mean, probably along with New Zealand, we've got the strongest schools rugby system on the planet. I think the guys are relatively cheap. I think, to pay someone, which for them is nothing, 2,000 or 3,000 euros a month, is a fortune to an 18 or 19-year-old in South Africa. Being in the same time zone makes commercial opportunities. And by that, I basically mean is that if there's more South Africans playing for French clubs, you're going to have more South African nationals following French clubs. And obviously, that can be a huge commercial base for the French teams. And then finally, there's the potential to help the French national team in the future. If you take our elite athletes, send them over there, 5 years, they qualify for the French national team, that's going to create a great French national team. Of course, it just makes sense. Then you got to think, why are South African kids interested in French clubs? Well, firstly, South Africa has massive societal problems that are frankly not as prevalent as they are in France. With the exchange rate, there's immediate earning potential, and there's also access to elite facilities and coaching. And there's also, of course, not to forget the European passport. I mean, to be able to get a European passport for a South African is worth its weight in gold. The green mamba ain't what it used to be, let's face it. And then the final thing I think that really is affecting the decision of these youngsters to go overseas is the quota system. They are probably not 100% sure that they'll be able to make the South African team in the future, especially with the government keep on insisting to raise up the quota barrier. So if they ever want to have a chance to play international rugby, a lot of these kids, they're probably thinking to themselves they've got no choice but to go to Europe, which is unfortunate. And then we've got to look at SARU'S angle. Can't just look at it from one angle. We've also got to look at it from SARU'S angle. Now, to be fair, I would also be quite upset if I was spending money on squad meetups at youth level and then I have that guy leave. I mean, I'm basically out of pocket in that situation. And there's also the loss of future Super Rugby and Currie Cup players. The under 20 teams got the potential to be weakened significantly, and I think the thought from SARU is that if they refuse South African school selection for these type of players, it will likely stem the flow of exports. And in my opinion, they are extremely wrong, and they could find themselves in a lot of trouble with this thinking. So let's go back to the whole point of this, WOLHUTER'S Law. I think SARU need outside the box thinking, and I think change is inevitable. I think they got to play smart, and then they can reap the potential rewards. Now, what I would think about doing is forming an agreement to protect South African rugby, the players as well as the French clubs. I think everyone needs to give a little to win a little. So I think SARU should have a fund in place for youth development from a very young age. I think we got to have to agree, our schools are our academies, and SARU should contribute somewhat to players' education at an elite institution. Now, should a club wish to sign a youngster under the SARU bursary system, SARU would then be entitled to compensation from that club, and I think you could set that forth by tribunal. Now, if SARU think they can get money by spending a few bucks in a training camp, I think they're wrong and they're entitled to nothing. They've got to help contribute to the kids' development. French clubs should not be able to make contact with players under the age of 18, and I think a tribunal should be put in place to basically make them either pay a fine or initiate a transfer ban, as been done in soccer. Now, all players, regardless of who they've signed with, they need to be given an equal opportunity to represent their country. I think this is very, very important. And then I think what clubs have to do as well is they have to agree to release the players for the Under-20 World Cup. The European leagues will have to initiate an international break from local competitions for this purpose. Now, if we take a look at a sportsman's journey, okay, in soccer, we see it happen time and time again, the full circle of their careers. What happens is that they start their youth careers in their country and eventually transfer to a European super club. What happens is they spend a large chunk of their careers there, and then finally, just before retirement, they inevitably go back to the club of their youth. It's great for the player who's a chance to prolong his career by a few years, and it's great for the club to get an experienced player in to help mentor the next generation before they make the big move to Europe. Now, could we see this happen in rugby? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. And the answer very simply is, we've seen it happen right now, guys. Morné Steyn has just moved to the Bulls. Andre Pollard has just left. So Morné Steyn is in the twilight of his career, obviously, as is Ruan Pienaar, and they're going to be playing at the Bulls and the Cheetahs respectively, earning a couple of bucks, prolonging their career by a bit, but most importantly, they're going to be helping mentor the next generation. I think if we play our cards right, we could see Kade Wolhuter, Robbie Rogers, and Leslie Botha come back in 15 years' time and do the same. Who knows what can happen? But I know it's not going to happen if SARU do not think outside the box. So in conclusion, I don't think there's a red-blooded South African alive who doesn't dream of putting on the green and gold the first time they pick up a rugby ball. To deny a kid the opportunity to represent his country due to not accepting the inevitable is simply put a travesty, like I alluded to before. We risk losing more prospects if SARU don't change their thinking. If Leslie Botha, Kade Wolhuter, or Robbie Rogers, or God forbid all three, become French internationals, it's going to backfire on SARU. For me personally, I'd love to see the youngsters stay in South Africa, win a Super Rugby title, and conquer the world. The reality is that there's a new reality, and we have to accept this. So my message to these youngsters would be to go out and show the world your talent and do your best to make your families proud, as that's what really matters at the end of the day. Thanks a lot for taking the time to watch this, guys. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on the matter. How would you structure things in terms of protecting the player, the club, and the national team? Do you have similar concerns to SARU, or do you think the boys should just go out and earn their money and do what's good for them? I really look forward to your opinion, and have a great week further as always, gents. Bye.